Hi, everybody. This is your cousin Brucey. And you're listening to the Fab Four Free for All with Mitch Axelrod, Rob Leonard, and Tony Triguado.
And welcome to another edition of Fab Four Free for All, the Beatles show on the internet, where we talk about Beatles, Beatles related, and everything Beatles, I guess. So it's definitely Beatles. Did you get that? I am your moderator for tonight's show, Big Shoe, Mitch Axelrod, and joining me, as they always do, and I'm glad they do, are my buddies Rob Leonard.
Hello, everyone.
And Tony Triguardo.
Hiya, folks.
And tonight we are going to be talking about the recently released, as of this taping, new documentary on the Beatles called Beatles'64. By now you will have seen a ton of reviews. We wanted to ingest it all many times, lucky us, before we actually expounded on it with our opinions. Sounds very SAT words tonight, but anyway. We are going to talk about the Beatles'64 doc, which has just premiered on Disney Plus as of this taping. So before we start, because all of us agreed on our opinions, we just want to start by saying that any new documentary on the Beatles, announcement of a new documentary is always great. We love it. We can't wait. We anticipate it. And even when it's released, whether it's good or not, it's still nice to have the Beatles in the news, to see the Beatles on the screen, on the big screen, small screen. And it's funny, I used to say the small screen for TV, but now people have, 65 and 80-inch screens. It's not small screen anymore.
Not anymore.
No, but so we love that stuff, and we anticipated very highly. And when this was announced, it was announced as they were taking the Maysles brothers footage from 1964 that they shot, and they were going to make a documentary on the excitement of the Beatles coming to America and having the first 2 weeks here, or being here for 2 weeks. And they were also tying in the release of the U.S. mono album set with this doc. That's how it was situated in all the press releases. So that's how the three of us and many others went into this. Correct, guys?
I'd say so.
Yeah, I'd say so.
All right. So when it first came on, again, total anticipation. And the first thing we see, and we're not going to go scene by scene by everybody, but we are going to talk about the points that we feel either were brilliant or missed the mark. And then you guys can agree or disagree with us. For me, the first thing was the opening. The Kennedy stuff, to me, was a little too long. I didn't think we needed, 3 or 4 minutes of Kennedy.
It was about 2.5.
Yeah, but still, it seemed like a lot longer. And I'll tell you why, because with the Kennedy stuff, personally, I think they should have just had the Cronkite death announcement and then, the excitement of the Beatles. But they did a lot of Kennedy, and they didn't emphasize that he really represented the youth and energy in government, like the Beatles represented youth and energy in music coming up soon. So, like, if they would have shown that more, then maybe it would have been more applicable to use that much footage. But I think they went a little too far with Kennedy. What do you guys think?
I think one of the things that hung me up about that was that, correct me if I'm wrong, but for years and years, so many pundits and documentarians, we've talked about it in different ways on the show even over the years, go into this idea of equating the fact that the Beatles coming in, the only reason why the Beatles were so huge was because America needed something to get them out of the terrible doldrums they were in after Kennedy's assassination. I'm not downplaying the idea that America was down and America was depressed because of the loss of this very youthful president. I get it. There are people I know who still haven't gotten over either John or Bobby or both. But why do you have to, in a way, automatically set the documentary up with, there was a reason why the Beatles were so big? Like, why do you have to essentially downplay the power of the Beatles themselves by making it almost like, well, there was a reason why they made it here.
Because
like,
that's always been the narrative.
Yeah, but it's been a narrative that I think or thought that the Beatle camp themselves were trying to sort of get away from. And in fact, it's very funny because I have a friend, my friend Brian, who's a Brit and who was living there when this happened, and was either living there or was living in Korea at the time. But he had a great point. He said, not only is it possible that the Beatles would have been just as big if Kennedy was still alive, but he had a really good point. He said, who would have been the biggest Beatles advocate probably in America? Kennedy.
Probably.
Who was all about the youth and vibrancy and the things that made America happy, So I don't know, just that whole thing really, really bothered me. That was let's equate the Beatles' meteoric rise with the fact that Kennedy had just been assassinated. It's like, enough already with that narrative. Maybe it's partly true, but
my problem was, and I agree with you, Tony, because we've talked to different people, and I've talked to different people on my shows or my show, and a couple of people have said, well, yeah, Kennedy was sort of there, but then it wasn't because the Beatles didn't happen because of Kennedy. It was sort of a continuing timeline that sort of ties together. And it depends on who you talk to and how old they were really in 1963, 64. My problem with the opening was, this is a Beatles documentary, and we're seeing John F. Kennedy for over 2 minutes. And they easily could have just started on November 22nd, 1963. John F. Kennedy was killed in Dallas. Go to the Cronkite clip, and then say underneath, on November 22nd, 1963, with the Beatles, was released in Great Britain. Perfect. 3 months later, they arrived in the United States.
Well, you maybe go to the release of. You start with the release of the single.
Right.
In January, yeah.
In January.
Yeah, if you want to say, and then say, all right, and then maybe have, WWDC played I Want to Hold Your Hand, and go to the Marsha Albert clip.
That would have been the Marsha Albert clip, would have been really
with
great.
Carol James, and then take it from there, because I agree, it's just these type of documentaries, if it was multi-part, I can understand that. This is an hour and 40. They blew a lot of time on stuff that we're going to talk about and not like.
And and not to jump ahead, Mitch, then why does the first music that we hear end up being a cover of a ballad version of All My Loving?
Yes.
Well, I guess they wanted to make it somber. They wanted to make it somber. I know.
But you're showing funerals, you're showing a funeral scene.
Yeah.
Whatever it is. Don't worry, we get it. It's sad. Like, just it seems so punch you in the face obvious. Like, it's just, I don't know, it's poor man's documentarianism.
You know what it does, Tony? It sets you up for boring. And I don't mean that. I tried not to be bored, but here's the thing. Right after you hear that cover by Elaine Kim, by the way.
Not that it's a bad cover, but
no, it's a nice cover, but it's a Beatle documentary, like Rob said. The first thing we should hear is a Beatles song. Sorry, but unless you're going to play a John F. Kennedy song because he's been in it for 2 minutes. No, but I mean,
you want to play Del Shannon doing "From Me to You"? That's fine.
But even when it starts off, after they show the funeral clip and they play the cover, the slow cover of All My Loving, you then just see Beatles'64 title. You don't, it's boring the way they even bring in the title.
Yeah.
Now, if they wanted to, I love the Zemeckis movie, I Want to Hold Your Hand, with Eddie Deason and Wendy Sperber, all that, Nancy Allen. That was exciting at the beginning because they showed the Beatles coming down the steps, and then you hear boom, 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 boom. That's what they should have done with this too. Even if you just flew in audio
from somewhere of chanting of "We want the Beatles."
Correct.
blam, Beatles 64.
Beatles 64.
In some really good splash font with American red, white, and
Well,
blue
they used the Meet the Beatles
fireworks.
font, if you noticed.
They did, but
Yeah.
But
you
it was boring. It just came on like
right. Yeah. It
instead
lived
of like
on.
punching you in the face. The
Right.
Beatles had the energy. They punched everybody in the face when they came here. You know what I mean? Not literally, but and this just came on like Beatles 64. Okay, now what?
Uh,
And then I got to be honest though, and I'm not meaning to go in order, but this bothered me. The first thing we get is Joe Queenan, talking head, talking about She Loves You. My sister came out and played me She Loves You, and it was like coming out of the darkness. It was music for us. Okay, please tell me why it was so dark musically. What was going on before the Beatles were here? We never get any Avalon, Fabian, Rydell, none of that garbage, which
Or
they
Beach
should have
Boys.
prefaced a
Yeah.
little.
Well, but
Because
again, though,
what are we dark from? What are we opening the light from?
because again, though, Mitch, that's the problem. Because there's a lot of mythology even in that.
I know.
I mean, come
But
on.
you already
Yeah, I
did the
know.
narrative of Kennedy. So if you're doing that narrative, you got to tell us why.
So you got to reinforce this narrative too of like, oh, everything was
But
so dark
no,
before the
no, you
Beatles
don't have
came.
to. You don't even have to tell us about Bobby Rydell and Frankie Avalon and all those.
But why? But my question is again, why did the Beatles be again? It's a cop out, and it's an excuse
I know.
for why the Beatles were so big. What you're basically then saying is we're
It's an
going
easy
to
answer.
belittle our subject matter
Right.
by saying, "Oh God, American music was so bad." I mean, you know what? Go back and listen to "The Night Has a Thousand Eyes." Go back and listen to all the Carole King singles that had come out in '61 and '62. Go back and listen to Bob Dylan. Go back, and then you tell me, "Oh God, music was so horrific in the early
But why?
60s
But then why
before
is
the
Joe?
Beatles arrived."
But why is Joe allowed to? Not allowed, but he's in
But-
there telling you that it was so dark. Music. It was like turning on a light. But why?
because
But the question is nothing against Joe Queenan. He's a good writer.
Oh yeah, I'm
But
not.
why is he the first talking head we see?
bingo.
And second of all, someone should have said to him and said, She Loves You wasn't releasing. I mean, we know it was on Swan, but no one heard it.
Right.
We know She Loves You got released after I Want to Hold Your Hand, was where everyone gets on board for this type of documentary.
March of '64.
Right.
I mean,
Right,
I
so-
Want to Hold Your Hand was January.
Right.
Again,
So when he says, so he's late to the game then, if he's,
Right.
listening to She Loves You, because no one bought the Swan record,
Right.
So,
and
Right.
by the
Look,
way,
but-
Tony, back to your point with the beginning with Kennedy, they reinforced the narrative by having Paul himself talk about it later in the show.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
really, he tells that.
I
Maybe we
agree,
did
I
too.
agree with you, but to me, like I said, and I'm not trying to, I really do genuinely feel like all you're doing is belittling your
I
subject
agree.
matter. To me, look, man, I hate to say this, but the Beatles were the friggin' Beatles. Period. The end. She Loves You, I Want to Hold Your Hand, all that stuff was groundbreaking. It wouldn't have mattered if there was other great rock and roll at the time. It wouldn't have mattered if the youth-loving president was still alive. The Beatles still came in and shook the tree.
And
No
it's
matter
also a
how
little
you slice it.
hypocritical. It's a little hypocritical because they do show a little graphic saying the Beatles had broken through already in the UK. But, so wait a minute. So you're telling me if the Beatles were big all over the UK and not just a little part of the UK in this town,
right.
like other people, if you're telling us they broke out in the UK, then they would have broke out here too. I'm
Right.
sorry.
Right, but
I
we
know a
were-
lot of British
Well,
fans didn't, but
some
you
didn't, but
already-
at this,
yeah, I
at
know.
the same, and the other thing that, this is the beginning, it's called Beatles 64, but it only focuses on a little, 15-day period.
Well,
And,
it's supposed to.
well, I know that, but don't call it Beatles 64 because,
Right.
right after they went back to Great Britain, they started to shoot A Hard Day's Night. And then they do a tour in the States. And then at the end of the year, they put out Beatles for Sale. And they
Right.
did a lot of other things.
It's-
And by saying Beatles 64, you expect this long documentary, and it's about the 2 weeks. Bruce Spicer did a book called The Beatles Are Coming in a 2-week period, and he covers it all. That's what it should have been called. The Beatles are coming, or the Beatles are here, or whatever.
The Beatles
But,
USA, whatever.
The
Yeah,
Beatles, the Beatles invasion, the Beatles. You know, I mean,
something.
you know, and Rob, to your point, that to me is the biggest fall down about this documentary. Well, one of the biggest fall downs about this documentary. It and there's so many points that I can get into, but it's on a grand scale, on a wide note. There are a couple of things that you set out to do when you're making a documentary. A, you pick your audience. B, as your information starts to come together, as your footage comes together, as you start to get your message, then you come up with an apropos title. You don't put a title together. You have a working title. You don't put a title together and then go, we'll throw crap at the wall and see what sticks. But this is the title because it's got to be about the Beatles 64 because it's the 60th anniversary and that's what we're going to call it. Like, just come up, because to me, another big issue is this has no target audience. Is it for the hardcores? Is it for the completely casual Beatles fan? Is it for the person who was there first generation? Is it for young people to get them turned on?
No.
What? It doesn't know. And that to me is the other big fall down. But you're right, Rob. The title is a big problem.
Yeah,
Right, because they did so much more, Rob, like you said. And quite frankly, if you're going to just do about the excitement of the Beatles in those 2 weeks, then just call it something else. I know what they were trying to do to make it with an anniversary, so it looks like, 64 to 2024. But you're right. Both of you are absolutely correct. It just, because they wandered all over the place anyway. I mean, they wandered into 1965. They wandered into 1967 and 68 here.
Right.
It's like, what the hell is going on in this documentary? Chronologically, it's all off. We know that. And
Oh, somebody's knocking at my door. Wait a minute. Oh, I think they're here to take my box set back, my Beatles.
No, but you know what? There were parts in this documentary where you think, okay, maybe it's going like in 8 days a week when we found out that the Beatles wouldn't play for segregated audiences and they started going to the civil rights stuff. In this, they were trying to do that for a couple of things, but they never followed up on it.
Well, they shouldn't have. It doesn't belong
I know
here.
I know that, but it was like, it's like, okay, let's go there, but then we won't go there. That was part of it also. It didn't know where to go once it started. Tony, you're right. It's like if you hit a fork in the road, as Yogi Berra said, take it, but you have to go one of the roads. And you can't just jump over to the other road and say, well, that looks better. Oh, I'm going to jump back. Oh, I'm going to, go somewhere else. I'm going to get a time machine and go back 30 years. It wasn't focused the way we would hope it would be as hardcore fans.
Well, even as a casual fan, it wasn't focused. I mean,
but they look at it differently. Like I have a friend
who
texted me. I haven't heard from him in years, and he goes, "I love the Disney Plus documentary. I loved it. I didn't know a lot of the stuff they were talking about." Okay. So, and that's something. Also, we know it. We know the story. A lot of people don't. But the problem is they didn't present it to make it more knowledgeable to a casual fan.
Now, to your point, Rob, I have a couple of friends at the library who are film people, but not Beatles people. They thought it was terrible. Even as just casual Beatles fans, they just thought this one guy came to me and said, "Do me a favor, dude. Could you recommend to me like a decent Beatles documentary?" I was like, "What?"
Yeah, the complete Beatles.
He was like, "Yeah." He said, "I just watched that thing on." He said it's got my interest going, but wow, what a bad film. Yeah. And I hate saying it so bluntly, but this was from, quote, the casual fan.
Yeah.
Again, I know a few let's flip it the other way. I know a couple of first generation people who were blown away by this. Because it invoked a certain amount of nostalgia that really, took for them. Like it really did. They even enjoyed, like I was bringing up specific things about the nostalgia that I really disliked. And one dear friend who's a media person was, but kept getting him around to, but are you defending the holistic idea of this film, of what this film was? Or are you defending the fact that A, it was made, B, it's got incredible live footage, and C, because you're a first gen fan? And I kept getting him back around to, yeah, you're right, I can't really defend the film. So,
right.
But anyway.
You know what? Let's talk about a few subjects and then we could get into it. So let's talk about the talking heads in general, okay? Because I know, Tony, you had some things to say. I do too, and we'll talk about even the Beatles themselves, the two remaining Beatles. So talking heads wise, the
talking heads were in here, at least.
That would have been fun.
Twice in a lifetime. But you know what? They had a bunch of the fans. Okay. They had Jamie Bernstein, who they don't identify as Leonard Bernstein's daughter until way later, and they don't even really do it there. They do it in a roundabout way by showing Leonard talking about his daughter. And then they show Jamie, and you go, oh, that's the Jamie that was in the first part of the show.
And she says, my dad, right.
And she's, yeah, but you don't even know. And then others, listen, some of them were okay. But to me, a lot of the fans' talking heads were just okay. They didn't really add a lot. If one of them saying, I screamed then, I don't understand it now, but that's what we did. Okay, but that's not like adding any value to this. And the one telling the broad dream, that was just bizarre for me. I understand she's trying to talk about the innocence of the Beatles and her, but that was just kind of a weird talking head. And then then we get, Jack Douglas, who told great stories, but not great stories. I'm still not sure he belonged in this doc.
See, I thought Jack Douglas was one of my favorite things in the film.
Okay.
Especially because then Jack Douglas, he ties it up at the end, which is really fun.
Yes.
So I thought Jack Douglas's stories, especially because Jack Douglas was essentially talking about taking 1964 back with him to England, which is kind of fun.
But you don't know whether he is talking about the influence of the Beatles when they were here in the first 2 weeks, or it could have been December of 64 when he heard them. I get it.
Right. But
they're very good stories, and it was very engaging because I've never, even as a hardcore, didn't hear them. So, and they showed pictures which were really good. But again, not sure. Just not sure.
But again, him being there I felt
it didn't hurt the movie.
But it wasn't super necessary.
Correct.
And it shouldn't have been as long either. The second time he came on, he went on and talked this whole story, and it's a nice story, but that does have to do with Beatles 64. Beatles in America. And also the other thing, it would have been nice to say, well, Jack Douglas, oh yeah, he worked with John Lennon on Imagine and Double Fantasy and with Yoko.
Even something underneath Double Fantasy and Imagine, nothing. Yeah. It's like all of the graphics were horrible.
Well, one more thing about the graphics, and I'm sure you guys felt this. When they started to show the talking head, you're like, okay, who's this? Who's this? And then waited like 10 seconds, and then they fonted them. And I'm like, hold it. By the time I'm figuring out who this person is, now you're telling me, and I'm not paying attention now.
Right.
Because I'm trying to figure out who this person is.
Right.
But,
and go ahead.
No, go ahead, Tom.
I was going to say, and getting around to, and this is no disrespect meant to the guy, but getting around to Sananda Maitreya, who is the new name for Terence Trent D'Arby. Now, so first of all, I'm watching this thing, and Mitch, you're saying they flashed a photo, but I didn't see and even seeing the dreadlocked Terence Trent D'Arby still would have been so out of context in this, because let's face it, Terence Trent D'Arby in a Beatle documentary, that's pretty friggin' out of place.
Especially since he said that his album was bigger than Sgt. Pepper.
Right. But I mean, anyway, where I'm going is that they
They don't even tell you formally Terence Trent D'Arby.
Never. So
Well,
I
I'm
have,
sitting there
I have,
going, I'm Googling while I'm watching the thing going, who is this?
I have no idea. I had a person say to me, well, there was some weird, like, unknown, I guess he must be known in whatever circle he's in, musician that kept coming up on it. And I said, that's Terence Trent D'Arby. And they were like, what?
Yeah.
And,
Okay.
but here's the thing. Again, talk about missed opportunities. When you've got a celebrity clip, what you've got to do is say, why is what this celebrity is saying important? And then you have to build footage around it because you've got a key great celebrity, okay? Or what you do is, again, you set up the motivation of your movie, you go, you interview, or you look for pre-existing footage of interviews with a lot of musicians, and you bring those in to reinforce your point. Now, here's my question. Martin Scorsese's probably got a hell of a Rolodex. Or you know what? He could have picked up and now I know he wasn't the director per se, but pick up the phone and call Mick and say, "Yeah, Mick, how you doing? I'm talking about Jagger. You got any friends' phone numbers? Hey, do you know Bruce? Hey, do you know? I mean, they could have called us. We could have given them a contact to Little Steven. I mean,
Well, I was going to say that because Little
you go.
Steven on our show, and he said it other places too, but he said on February 9th, people watched the Ed Sullivan Show with the Beatles. On February 10th, people started bands.
Thank you.
Yep.
That
why? And I
is
know,
perfect.
listen, this is not anything racist or anything with black and white, but, we're talking about a musician who not many people even know as Terence Trent D'Arby. No,
He's
no
had one
disrespect.
hit.
He had
He's had
one hit, Wishing Well, I
Right.
think.
yeah.
But if you would have had someone like, to your point, Rob, Steven Van Zandt, who was such a huge Beatle fan,
Liberty
and would have been-
DeVito, for God's sake.
Right. There's
Anybody,
another
right?
one.
Anybody,
Billy Joel, hello.
anybody who picked anybody who's, again, not belittling Terrence, anybody who's a bit bigger in the food chain in music, who became a musician because of February 9th or February 7th or whatever you want to say, they came here. That's who you should have had in here.
Yeah.
Not Terence Trent D'Arby. Nobody knew what the connection was.
I mean,
listen, I could have been on there saying I became a musician because of the Beatles at the age of 2, and I did, but guess what? It wouldn't mean squat. But if they had, if you had someone like Bruce saying, I saw the Beatles and I went, yeah, that Billy Joel. Yeah, that's for me. People would know Billy Joel without anything underneath. They would know who he is without any graphic at all, and they would relate to it. I couldn't relate to.
And don't
Terrence.
get me wrong, it could also be an idea where maybe they did reach out to a few people. I mean, years and years and years ago, I reached out. Well, years and years ago, I reached out to Mickey Dolenz to have Mickey on our show to talk about Harry Nilsson. And very, 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 very kindly, very politely, Mickey turned us down because they had just finished making the Who is Harry Nilsson and Why is Everybody Saying Such. And Mickey was kind of like, I got to be honest, Tony, I'm Nilssoned out, So you know what? Maybe somebody did reach out and Billy Joel was like, I don't want to do some documentary. I said my piece 20 years ago when they did that.
But not one would say yes.
But that's what I mean. But you got to the point where you brought in Terence Trent D'Arby, who, I mean, is he good friends with the director or Martin Scorsese?
That's what I think. But who's one of the executive producers?
Go
Well,
ahead.
two of the executive producers, Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr. Who are they friends with?
Everybody.
Billy Joel, Bruce Springsteen, Miami
Anybody.
Steve, Little Steven. They know
Randy-
them. They
well,
played with them.
Randy Bachman, but that's Canada. But I mean, you could still. I mean,
Liberty
there's
DeVito, Max Weinberg.
DeVito, Max Weinberg. There are so many people who were so influenced by that one appearance.
Yep.
Now, Rob, to your point again, Rob, thank you this is a great segue, and we'll get back to other talking heads. You mentioned Paul and Ringo, right? Let's talk about them. There is nothing that they said, hardly anything that they said, which adds to this documentary. It seemed like Ringo was sitting for a little while with Martin Scorsese, and he talked about the octopus, bringing the helicopter down, which he said before. And that's fine. If you never heard it as a casual fan, that's great to hear. I was excited to get to New York. Other than that, tell me one thing that Ringo said. There's not enough of Ringo or Paul in here, but tell me one thing he said or Paul said that added to this documentary.
That's a tough one because, Paul's show in Brooklyn and his book that he put out with these pictures is sort of a connector to it.
Yes.
This documentary. And, Paul's pictures probably work better even though they don't have a lot of, explanation the way this documentary does. But
What doesn't?
that's a good point. I mean, maybe we're getting to the point where, we're cutting up the storylines for the Beatles. And, this is a small storyline. It's 2 weeks. It's a major storyline, but it's still a small amount. I wasn't bothered by Paul and Ringo's lack of in-depth coverage of themselves because the clips they used of John were from the Tomorrow Show, and George was takes from the anthology.
But they spoke directly to the content.
Yes.
Right.
Paul and Ringo did not really.
Yeah.
Ringo sitting there talking about his clothes with Martin Scorsese. That shouldn't have been there in there at all.
Truth be
I didn't
told, you could have found
either.
archival footage of Ringo and
my
Paul.
idea,
That would have been much more apropos.
what I think should have happened, and again, I know that maybe they didn't have time and maybe they don't care anymore.
Time?
No, hear me out. What I'm saying is they should have got all the footage together that they were going to compile for here. All right. They should have showed it, sit down with Ringo and Paul together or separately, record their memories and use that as the narrative. Forget everybody else. You could easily, and have George and John from, whatever clips they had.
I got news for you. That's part of the issue, I think, Mitch.
What?
Because as we've learned with Ringo, and I no disrespect
Memories.
to memories.
I know.
I mean, we went from a train to a car to a.
I know he talked about in the round, and he got that wrong too. Again,
Right.
but he remembered he had to be turned around at least.
Yeah.
God. So I'm not killing him for that. Ringo actually had more. That's all right, Rob. Just one sec. Ringo had more to say than Paul because Paul was promoting his stuff in Brooklyn. All right. It happened to tie in, but what they also missed the opportunity there is there's a movie in the movie of Paul taking photographs of Ringo on a chair.
Yep.
I don't know if he had that in the museum or not, but it would have been really cool if they superimposed the actual photo over that and said and went click, you heard click like all the other documentaries, and you saw the actual photo that you just saw him taking. That would have been kind of cool. That would have brought in his photo exhibit more because he has some incredible photos in that exhibit and in the book Eyes of the Storm.
Yeah.
So I would have loved that. But there's no reason for him to tell her she loves you, yes, yes, yes. And I know, Tony, you disagree with me. And there's he didn't really say anything else at all. And wow, he cursed. He said the F word. That's lovely hearing a Beatle curse. But
yeah.
No, but it's, again, there was nothing that Paul and Ringo themselves added that was like so great.
The reason why I like the yes, yes, yes thing in there is because at least it relates directly to the one thing that they didn't seem to put across, and the only person that tried to put across actually got all of his freaking factual information wrong. But it comes across with, a couple of people do make reference to it, but their love of American music and American pop culture, Ringo loved Westerns. I was kind of laughing because in Paul's book, he makes reference in lyrics. He makes reference to a couple of American TV shows, from the late 50s, early 60s. Did they get those over there too? I don't know. But my point is, they were influenced by America. So if you're going to do a thing about 64 and them coming to America, what is we weren't going to come to America till we had a number one there. Why? Because that's where it was all it emanated from. That was us. That was us returning to the roots of the music that we love, that we were now bringing back. The whole idea of them bringing our music back to us was kind of brushed aside. It was kind of brushed under the rug. Where to me, that idea was also really, really important. You know.
But they did it in a different way, Tony, and they did it in an incorrect way, in my opinion. They tried to, again, this is about the focus, as both of you have said. They tried to make this a bigger than it should have been thing within an hour and 45. And that's where it got all convoluted, because we don't need to hear about, quite frankly, we don't need to hear Smokey's story, incorrect story, about them doing, you really got a hold on me.
See,
I disagree with you on that.
Wait. Unless you tell it like Tony said in the context of that, because that is in a bigger story, like Beatles in general, like an anthology thing. That's not for these 2 weeks of excitement.
Yeah, but that was one of my favorite parts of the documentary.
But it's all wrong, you know that.
What? He
was all wrong.
Well, I found out that they did go in '63 to Great Britain. So they might have met him they said there was a stop at Liverpool.
Yeah, whether but he also said it was in the cavern, in the small
pub. They might have met him there, but maybe not played there. Maybe they.
No, he said that they played stuff.
Okay.
I looked too, and I think it said the Miracles' first ever UK tour was March and April of '65.
I read '63 also. Then I just checked that.
But that's still a year away from the last time they played in the cavern.
Right.
So either way,
and also too, I mean, yeah, but I mean, it's that idea too that he might not have gotten it all completely whacked out wrong. It might have been the fact that, yeah, he met them in a downstairs at a club. He met them at the Bag of Nails.
Right.
Probably.
You know what I mean?
It was in London. That's where it'd be.
Right. So the idea is, did he meet them in a club? Yes. Did it again? If they had just shown Smokey Robinson saying, "Hey man, the Beatles did You Really Got a Hold on Me," and it came out in the UK in '60, and someone off camera saying, "Well, Smokey, that came out in the UK in 1963, and then here in the States in '64." Yeah, it did, and it was huge for us, man. It was huge. Even if you had somebody guiding them a little bit to just friggin' keep them on track with
Here's the thing, Tony.
The plot line of the movie. Like, I love that idea of Smokey talking about the fact that they breathed new life into Smokey Robinson and the Miracles.
Yes, but does it belong in this 2-week documentary? Okay.
Because it's a direct result of this visit, of them coming over, of DJs now. That music was passé already. These guys are playing top 40 music. Well, now all of a sudden, the Beatles version of You Really Got a Hold on Me is going to get airplay.
Okay, so now, sorry, Rob, I'll let you speak in one sec. Sorry. Now, that's a great point, that the music was now being played in '64 when they got here, and more money was rolling into their pockets, all right? Which is amazing for those writers. But, as we talked about off air, don't show me with the Beatles. Show me second album. You can show me the credits on the back of second album, and it still says You Really Got a Hold on Me, especially if you're touting the U.S. set, mono set, as the companion piece to this.
Bingo.
But I'm not sure
show
they
me
were going
with the Beatles.
I don't think they were going to connect that, and that also is beyond, what they're focusing on, which is February '64.
But
I understand that part.
But November of '63, they just showed you the album.
And don't forget, Rob, the whole idea is we just talked about. It's a poorly titled movie. The movie's titled Beatles '64.
Right.
So you know what? You could show
got a hold
second album.
64.
Now, the thing about the Smokey Robinson thing, I like that he talked about the Beatles mentioning the Motown acts, and they were a white band of their status who have gladly admitted where they get their influences from.
First white big band, yeah.
Yeah, and to me, he's told that story before. I've seen it, but it's nice to see it in here. There was a movie about Motown that was basically Smokey Robinson and Berry Gordy. Yep. And one of the things they mentioned is the Beatles covering 3 Motown songs, and how that established them as a place where you can get cover songs now. And in that movie, it's a nice little section because it's true. And Brian Holland, Dozier Holland, said he made so much money off of Please Mr. Postman, he went out and bought a Cadillac.
Right.
Which was a major thing because not all those guys were getting paid the way they maybe should have been. That's how much money the Beatles brought into Motown and to specifically that writer.
But
the problem with Smokey was they wasted 2 minutes of this 1 hour, 42-minute movie with Yesterday. No.
Right. First of all, I understand that he reciprocated, but he reciprocated on a 1965 song in March 31st of 68 on the Ed Sullivan Show.
But just show it to me on some. Just show it to me on some. For lack of a better word, on some Chiron. Show that to me on text. Just show, and Smokey would repay the favor on this Ed
Sullivan Show in
1968. And here's 30 seconds of Yesterday,
or 20 seconds of Yesterday.
Right, but
or maybe we get a Beatle clip saying how much, especially from the BBC, we love Mary Wells, we love Marvin Gaye, we love these people. In 1963, no one really knew who they were in Great Britain. They were promoting the Motown artists before Motown was doing it. That's, and then in America, they also mentioned, and then, George requested the Motown song, the Miracle song. So that was a good thing it was Ringo. I'm sorry. It was Ringo.
Yeah,
right.
Song.
So that was a great little thing. And that should have been the tie-in because here are the Beatles on the Murray the K show. And, he's big guy in New York City, though wasn't the only big guy. And they should have then went straight to that. You don't need editing. Smokey.
Right. Right after Smokey.
Well,
you don't need to see Yesterday. Wait, hang on one sec, don't. You show Smokey, all right, and you say the Beatles did this for us, and then you cut to the Marty K clip where he's, I got Ringo on the phone, and Ringo's saying, I want to hear the Miracles. You don't need to even have Yesterday. The Beatles themselves are freaking requesting the Miracles. You have it. You show it later. It doesn't mean anything later. It would have meant something right after Smokey. It would have enforced what he just said.
And I do have to say, it was kind of funny but they never address it other than George addressing it of how the hell did Murray the K get in there? Right. Like you get the question, but you don't get the answer.
They didn't know. He didn't know.
No, but the idea is, they could have very quickly paid tribute to the. I mean, I know the Maysles brothers didn't have footage of the good guys, but you know what? Pay tribute a little bit. Do a little bit of a thing of a few clips from around the country. I know our focus is the Maysles brothers footage. I get it, but you could have called it then the Maysles of the Beatles and the Maysles in America.
Wow.
I mean, no, but I'm just saying, you're limited to your footage, or you're limiting your footage, or choosing to.
But they didn't really, because they pulled from other sources. They called it Maybe I'm a Maysle.
Right. Oh,
sorry.
But I mean, I don't know.
What? Let's keep going with talking heads.
Well, no, I just want to go. I actually want to continue what Tony was just saying. Tony, you're right. WMCA broke I Want to Hold Your Hand in New York.
Yes.
Capitol Records was so happy they put a picture of the Good Guy Jocks on 1,000 copies of I Want to Hold Your Hand.
Right.
That is one of the most rare records around, or picture sleeves. Cousin Brucey, who we've interviewed and has great Beatles stories, and in February of this year, 2024, did a great thing with Jamie Bernstein at City Winery, talking about his connections with the Beatles.
Nothing on him.
Is there anything with Cousin Brucey, who is still alive and the last of the jocks of that era, basically?
He should have been in
it.
it.
Go to him, or, well, maybe they did, but they didn't use any of it if they did. He's not in it. He should have been in it. Brucey has got all his marbles. It's not like he'd be rambling or something. He should have been in there somewhere, especially if George is saying, well, how the hell did Murray the K get in here? Well, here's Cousin Brucey, And
I don't know. How the hell did Murray get in there?
By the way, just as a cross promote, we have also interviewed Brucey, and he's on our shows.
But you're right, Rob. A lot of other people, especially like we said in the beginning, even Carol James. I mean,
right.
Marsha Albert, and none of that was in here. And that, they actually have Marsha Albert doing the dedication with Carol James.
Yep.
That you have something so historic and you don't put it in here, but that's beside the point. But let's keep going. Leonard Bernstein himself, they show him. He's been a known Beatle fan his whole life.
Yeah, and what do they show him doing? They show him counting She Said, She Said.
From the Rock Revolution
From the
special
Rock
in
Revolution
1967.
Yep.
And they play She Said, She Said.
And when he's talking about long hair in music, he's not talking about the Beatles wearing it over their ears.
No,
he's talking about long-haired hippie freaks of 67.
Exactly.
So not only are you taking something that's out of time, you're also putting it out of context, really, which is even kind of more annoying as a librarian and a historian. That makes me want to scream.
But if you're a casual fan, you're not knowing that that's from 67. You're not caring about, you're hearing Beatle music, so you don't care that she said, especially if you don't know what album everything is on. You're just a Disney Plus person who's watching a nice Beatle documentary. You don't know. That doesn't excuse it. All right. Sorry. You shouldn't have She Said, just like in the beginning, you shouldn't have In My Life. I'm sorry. In My Life doesn't belong in this documentary.
Oh, In My Life is so tired.
Oh my God! Everybody says it's the best Beatles song around now, and it's like,
oh my God,
are you kidding me? But
it's just so tired. As here's the montage of enough within. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think it's one of those Beatles songs ever written.
Yes,
but
it doesn't belong here.
It doesn't belong here. And let's go to the happy-go-lucky documentary part, just for me to really pick Ioun and savagely rip apart two little bits of this that made me scream. The happy-go-lucky documentary, where you really needed that obnoxious prick of a guy who makes himself off to be the Beatles manager in front of the girl.
Oh my God!
And waste 2 minutes of our time.
What was that for?
Pulling wool over these girls because it was in the Maysles footage. And you really needed the ending of that whole segment with the girls in the corridor for the hotel security guard to say, "I'm going to throw you down the stairs."
Oh, I thought that was
that in. I thought that was the most unnecessary bit of again, like, New York bashing that just wasn't like. I get it, I get it. Haha, it's funny, but it's not. It's not
look
really
at it that way. I thought. Well, first of all, Martin Scorsese at one point goes, "Were you guys influenced by film noir of New York City?" Now, he's, of course, one of the great directors. He does film noir. He knows film noir. But, he's asking from a film look, not a music look. And plus, I was shocked that Martin Scorsese is actually shorter than Ringo. But that's a whole other thing. But those two scenes, Tony, did not bother me at all. Actually, the guy who was pretending to be the manager, I thought it was a good look at like how maybe the older generation might have looked at Beatle fans and the Beatles music. I thought that was part of it. And my other thing is the hotel security, where he says he's going to throw him down the stairs. That's the way they handled things back then. The fact that he said it to two 17-year-old girls,
Yeah, that's what I mean. It was kind of like, I get it. I know that's how things were. I'm not saying we need to whitewash, but again, it's that idea of, do you leave that in? Is it essentially, I guess, gratuitous would be my thought. It's like that whole segment runs too long because you've got to show him getting annoyed.
Yes,
you gotta, show him I'm at my wit's end.
Yeah. But
so that you could get to that final line. But my idea is, why leave the whole thing in? You leave the whole segment in so that you could get to this and have it be justified. I'm going to throw you down the stairs if you don't, get.
Well, but here's my point on that.
Unnecessary.
The two girls are going up the corridor, and they're asked, "Do you like the Beatles?" They're all right. I mean, it's not like they're like, "Oh my God, we're going to."
No, but I think they did that intentionally.
Oh, all right, but hang on.
My
So
feeling.
now they
The
go
girls
down
did
the
that.
hall and listen. There's rumored to be like 20 more hours of Maysles footage, right? Whether it's picking noses or whatever and not interesting, we don't know. But that clip of the hallway, it doesn't, no pun intended, come to a climax. Maybe the
It
girls
could have
did,
been
but
another song.
well, yes, because
It could have been
when
another Beatles
I
song
agree, because
from Washington Coliseum.
but the girls go down the hallway, and if you would have had one of the Beatles poking their head out, going, "Hi, girls," and them going, "Ah," that would have been amazing, and it would have been something. But there's nothing.
I
There's no
was,
climax to that scene
yeah,
at all.
I was
Except
actually
I'm throwing you
waiting.
down the stairs.
Right, I was actually waiting for something like that to happen.
Me
Mitch.
too.
Yes, I
And
figured
nothing was happening.
it
Nothing.
had to be. There had to be a reason why this footage is in this film.
Well,
Now,
I think it was just because one of the things I do like about the movie is the fans that they do
Yeah.
show.
yes, that's good.
Because first of all, we're all three New Yorkers. It's nice to hear a real New York accent
Yes.
because it's fading away. It's not that harsh anymore.
Right.
And you know, probably because more people from the outside of New York are moving in. And I really appreciated some of the comments that the girls said about the Beatles, and you know, sometimes they'd scream, but sometimes you know they had legitimate answers.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I think that was a pretty good part. I thought when they interviewed the guys up in Harlem, and
Yes.
they're talking about how they like jazz.
That was great.
Okay, that scene went on way too long for me because yeah, well, those you can tell those guys are jazz guys. You
But it
know,
was
They-
still-
Yeah,
but it
I
was
see what you
still-
mean. I appreciated that it was there, but it did go on a little long. You could tell that they're jazzers. I really, really liked the intelligent commentary from the woman that he was talking to, that he was interviewing.
yeah.
And I appreciated that the guys were like, nah, not really. And I appreciated the other guy that was like, what's with the hair?
I also appreciated the African American girls saying we love them, because it showed the other side of that, because they were showing, obviously they were trying to get the African American opinion on the Beatles. So
Yeah.
they got the guys saying, some of the guys were saying they were good.
Yeah,
Some of them were saying-
older gentlemen, interestingly
Right.
enough, the older guys were into it.
Now, right. And then the jazz guys were like, oh, I think they're disgusting, because they're taking their girlfriends away.
Yeah,
But
right.
then they showed the African American girls talking, and they loved it, which I appreciated, because it showed that the Beatles had the influence on both black and white fans
But
and
even-
teenagers, and so that was kind of cool
But even the footage in the apartment with
when they're watching
when they're watching
the Ed Sullivan
was
show.
kind of anticlimactic
It was
too.
boring.
Like it ran too long. And I know
It
you're
wasn't even
showing a
exciting.
family, but you know what? Not for anything. The girls weren't screaming at the television.
No, they were just
No.
like,
They were
were, like,
like
looking at them, and
smiling.
they
They
were
were
the-
happy.
Yeah.
It made them happy.
Well,
Great.
maybe because Dad was right next to him, and they didn't want
Exactly.
to scream in front
Exactly.
of him.
yeah, but you know what?
Yeah.
I to your point again, Rob, you're making a great point. I would have loved if they would have put in more footage of the fans talking about the Beatles. Not
Yeah.
the talking heads now, not the fans now, with 60 years later. I don't care. If you would have shown me them back then just talking about the Beatles then, that says it all to me with the narrative. I don't need to hear, well, we screamed then and then we don't know why we did now, I don't know, but I don't need that. I wanted
Well,
to hear
that
the
part-
actual
that
reaction
part-
from them.
If you have the same person, today and
Eh.
from 1964, that's a
Right.
little different. I think because you question what you did. We all question sometimes what we did in the past. So to me, and that part didn't bother me as much because there's so many more things to be bothered by. But and then you go back to the movie I Want to Hold Your Hand Again. Because that captured a moment. And in many cases,
Excitement.
I mean, it's a movie, but it seems truer than some of the things we've seen in this.
And
Yes,
talk
now-
about having a ground team, okay? Which you don't really need anymore because you have this thing called the internet.
Yeah.
If you've gone on the internet and said all points bulleted out to tens of thousands of websites that have any Beatle involvement, to every, hey, a documentary is being made about the Beatles. If you remember being interviewed
Here we go.
by a member of the or something like that, can you imagine having a clip of some kid going, "Oh my God," and the Beatles, and then cut into that person now holding their side, cracking up, laughing, and being like, "Wow, I can't believe that's me."
You could listen again.
You know-
Coming back to me, you could have had me. I have film of me on the beach wearing the Beatles sweatshirt in '64. You could have had me, and then now talking about that, I still love the Beatles. We're doing a show. I mean, this. I'm not saying I should have been in there. I'm not. That's not what
Well, I'm
saying.
going to take my version of the movie and I'm going to dub your footage right into
Please
it.
do it. No, but you
With
know what,
you
Tony?
right now talking about this.
But they did that with 8 Days a Week, and then they used none of it.
Right.
They did. They put out a website saying if you have pictures of the Beatles live, if you have movies, and then
Right.
they used none of it. So
Yeah, well, that's because it changed the
But this also
timeline,
se-
and it
This
changed.
seems like it changed too.
And I think this changed too along the way. And I'd like to know how much Martin Scorsese was involved. We know he was involved with Living in the Material World, that
Which I didn't
documentary.
think was that great.
And he was a director of this. This is David Tedeschi,
Right.
who was
Tedeschi.
the editor of that movie, by the way.
Tedeschi, Rob.
So I don't know. There's just missing parts.
Well, you know what?
This.
Again, you're segueing me perfectly, Rob. I love you. Missing parts. Let's talk about the Ed Sullivan Show.
Okay.
We don't get the excitement of the Ed Sullivan Show.
We don't get the
Why
intro.
were the Beatles so excited? What was the importance of the Beatles coming here to do the Sullivan Show? That was all of them in the hotel leading up to it. We got to go to rehearsals, guys. Let's go. We're going to be late.
You got to
And
pay
then you
for
don't
it.
even get Ed's introduction.
You got to pay for it.
Yeah, but they have an
Oh,
agreement
come on.
with
They can't
Sullivan
afford to pay
Productions.
for the
Do they?
intro.
Yeah,
Do
they remember when they put out the 4 Ed Sullivan shows with
Yeah.
the Beatles on it?
Yeah.
There's sort of a trade-off on that where Sullivan gets to syndicate those those shows or those performances, and the Beatles get to use stuff that on different things. There's a definite agreement with that.
But even if they had to pay, you're not
And
going.
even if you did, it wouldn't be that
You're not going to pay
much.
for the iconic introduction from Ed
Because
Sullivan.
again, is it overused? It's the same
Not
reason.
for a casual fan.
I don't think so either. I'm agreeing with you, but I'm just saying, I'm trying to figure out what the hell was going
know.
on in their heads.
I just don't know, Tony and Rob. I don't know. Like the Sullivan Show was the main thing, the beginning of why they were here and why they came here. Okay,
Right.
so, but you don't get the excitement of the Sullivan Show. You don't even get really clips from the Sullivan Show. You get Twist and Shout, which was taped before the first show and they showed it on the 23rd of February.
Right.
I think you get a little bit of. Do you get you
She
get I
Loves
Want to Hold Your Hand incomplete.
Yeah.
You get I Saw Her Standing There incomplete.
And by the way, speaking of Twist and Shout, I did like the Isley Brothers bit. That I appreciate.
See, but
I
that
like
should have
that.
that should have been right after Smokey.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah,
They
but
did a
either
little
I
way.
thought the
together.
Isley Brothers thing was good. He was a good talking head.
Yeah.
One of the problems is the Maysles brothers had no access to the Sullivan Show, so they weren't allowed to film there.
Right.
So that's why they went to that apartment.
Right.
So
There's
that
no
would be part of
backstage.
it too.
Right.
Right, but they still could have cut to the actual Sullivan Show.
Well, that's
I mean-
part of it, but it's also this movie and the First U.S. visit are running parallel, but the First U.S. visit's a lot better because it's just more focused on the Beatles and the music. So
And speaking of which, I mean, before there's not enough music. First
Well,
of all.
that's what I was going to say, Rob. You are so leading. It's like we talked before, Rob, because
We
you just
didn't.
said the music, and I'm thinking to myself, this has no real focus on the Beatles' music.
I will say this, that to me, the footage from Washington Coliseum is
Unbelievable.
absolutely effing mind-blowing.
And the
It's
Maysles Brothers
mind-blowing.
footage is beautiful.
Absolutely gorgeous. I mean, it's phenomenal. That alternate shot of Beethoven, I mean, yikes. It just absolutely fantastic.
But the first thing we get, Tony, is what? What's the first Beatles song we get in this movie?
She Loves You.
She Loves You from Washington, which is after the Sullivan Show.
Right.
And then the second song we get is She Loves You. It's like I thought they only had the rights
that's
to use
true.
She Loves You in this thing. I was like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
That's
Like,
true.
there's no other Beatles song you can play instead of "She Loves You Again."
And like you said,
The song that was
at no point do we get da 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 da
Nothing.
da,
Well, all
which
right.
is what started it all. Like you
Well,
just
there
picked
is
it out.
one talking head. She comes on and says how she related to "I Want to Hold Your Hand." She never got Elvis. She didn't care about Elvis, but she related religiously to "I Want to Hold Your Hand." At that point is exactly what you should have heard. Dun dun dun. Nothing. We get nothing.
yeah.
I'm sorry, but we get, "She Loves You Again." I kept thinking, you know, are we only going to get 4 Beatles songs in here? We don't even get a lot of Beatles songs in this thing. We get
No.
a few clips. We get 2 complete clips. We do. I looked. There are only like 2. We get "Washington from Me to You," all right, and we get, I'm sorry, 3: "Long Tall Sally" and "Beethoven," but Beethoven has the credits over it and everything.
Right.
So
Right.
we get the audio. We don't get the visuals, and those look amazing,
And they
right? And we
sound
have to give them total credit.
incredible.
Long
They
Tall
sound
Sally
great.
sounds fantastic. Though I thought Ringo's drumming was a little mixed down to me.
No, I
Because
thought it was perfect. He sounded
okay, I'll,
great.
I'll go with you. You're the drummer, but when they open it and they leave the camera on because that's the way they shot it. It wasn't being shot. It was being shot by CBS for that screening in March. So they're
Right.
just sort of just sitting there, and it's just you watch the whole stage just from this one camera. It looked fantastic, and you
Yeah.
see Paul just killing this version of Long Tall Sally. I mean, it's just incredible. And then and with Roll Over Beethoven, it's in the back, like you said, Tony. But if you noticed, when CBS filmed it, the mic didn't work for them, and George moves over. But the Mayless Brothers version, you hear feedback, and then George moves over. So, but you hear that feedback on the CBS thing, the thing that was released in 2009 by the Beatles.
Yeah.
The DC Coliseum show. So it was interesting that maybe George moved not knowing that his mic wasn't working, but because of feedback.
Right.
So,
right.
They would have broken to "I Feel Fine" on the documentary.
Beatles 64. Mm.
Well, it was actually released in
I know,
64.
I know. But I'm
They
just-
could have.
on
It was
Beatles
on
65.
65.
On Beatles 65.
Yeah, explain that. The other thing that I wanted to bring up, and we'll talk a little bit more, but a couple of things that I thought were absolutely brilliant. Kudos for anybody who took the time to think that George Harrison did "Got My Mind Set on You," and they
Yeah.
got that clip of him introducing it.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Absolutely. Whoever thought of that, if you're watching this, I'm sorry we're killing the show, but that part was so unbelievably brilliant and astute that I was like, that is just great.
And the quality of that isn't that great.
But it doesn't matter. It was so beautiful.
I wonder where they got that, because the quality is, you could barely hear them. But they should have mentioned somewhere, well, George Harrison covered this and had #1 hit in 1987.
Well, that could have been underneath. Right. Underneath the little graphic could have said, by the way.
Yeah.
So that was actually really, really cool. The glaring thing for me on the other side was they showed that clip of them in the limousine saying, "Tonight at 7, the Beatles read their own poetry." But they cut out the best line. They cut out the whole thing. "Oh ho, but we ain't written no poetry." They cut that line out. That's the best. He's 21 years old and he's so clever and funny.
Yeah.
And they cut the line out. Why do you do it? And it's a bad edit too, because he's just about to say it, and I'm going, wait, what? How do you not say it? It was so funny, and it showed the humor of the Beatles, and that because they showed the humor of the Beatles in the press conference, and they didn't keep it up like that. That's why we loved them too, because they were so funny and fresh, and the girls loved it for that, and we loved it, and they cut out the best freaking line of that thing. I couldn't believe it.
I wish they'd had more of the press conference, because that's that a lot of those clips have been shown, but it would have been, I mean, you can't have the whole 6 minutes of it because the various prints have to be merged together. But it would have been nice to have a couple of more questions. And also, when George said that he didn't know how Murray the K got there, in the beginning of the press conference, someone yells, "Tell Murray the K to sit the heck down," or whatever. And that would have been a nice little connection. Because
right after you should have heard George say, "How the hell did he get there?"
Yeah, right. That's
again,
that would have been a nice tying together because there's a lot of loose ends in this thing that we
Yeah.
know could have been tied together and weren't.
Well, let's talk about that, Rob. Once again, you freaking are killing me. No, I
Thank
mean
you.
you're killing me with this because it's like we spoke before, and folks, we didn't. It's weird.
We didn't.
Tony and
No,
I
no.
spoke, but Rob and I are on the same page.
No, I don't talk to you guys when we're not doing the show. You know, it's
Well,
like
you just said a lot of loose ends. They show a headline saying Beatle has a bug, George sore throat, and they don't tell that it could have been catastrophic to the whole 2 weeks because they didn't even say. They show a picture of Neil Aspinall at the rehearsal. They don't even, like, why is he there instead of George? They don't
Right.
tell you that. But then an hour later, you hear George on the phone going, "Yeah, my throat's all right." It's like, wait, what? And they show
Huh?
two Beatles walking around Central Park. They don't
Right,
tell
right.
why George is not there.
right.
That should have been tied up in a nice little narrative. Like something should have been somewhere, someone has to have that George was sick and almost didn't make the show. I mean,
Right.
that's a
And
big thing.
also his sister came in to do it, and that's been part of her story for a long time because, you know,
Well, I know
they
Olivia
mentioned
probably
it a
didn't
little
want her
bit.
sister in there.
Yeah, I know that. That's a whole other thing. But, you know, we know that George was in Benton, Illinois, where she lived
Right.
in, you know, in 1963, so what, September. And, you know, you could have had,
He was
you
in
know,
New York too, by the way.
right. And they didn't really mention that, you know, he was there first,
No.
you know, and that he was able to walk through, you know, America without anyone noticing him. It's a great story.
But also
You know,
we have Harry Benson at the end of the show basically saying how they were apprehensive to come to America. Wait,
Who's also never ID'd.
yeah, well, right. I think they do show, they don't say he's a photographer, they just said Harry Benson. Like
Yeah.
Mitch Axelrod, Schmo. But
Right.
he was their photographer. He took the famous pictures of them with the pillow fight when
Right.
but they don't say anything. But then they say, but he says they were apprehensive about coming here. But you said that at the end of the show. Why didn't you put that in the beginning with the Kennedy stuff?
Right.
I don't care at the end that they were apprehensive. You just showed them having fun for 2 weeks. Now you're telling me, oh yeah, by the way, they were apprehensive. Wait, what? Harry, someone said, wait, we paid Harry. We got to put his clip in there. And where do we do? Oh, we'll just throw it at the end. No, you don't. All of it. There's not enough of Miami. There's a tiny bit of Miami. The Beatles themselves said that Miami was a revelation to them. Sunshine and
I know
Lollipop.
everybody's seen them, but weren't there a ton of Bob bonus photos that would have been appropriate too?
Yes.
I know a lot of people have seen them, but Bob's photos in here would have been amazing.
Bob Bonus.
That's
Bob
it,
Bonus,
Bob
yeah.
bonus. That's what it is.
Okay.
I absolutely loved that they showed George having a lot of fun on the train.
Yes.
You know, I
Right,
mean,
right.
George was just
That was cute.
ripping it up at the age of 20. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's great.
I loved that because, you know, he was a kid. He was 20 years old.
Yeah.
And he's having a lot of fun doing the you know, the
waitering
thing,
and
the waitering and
Yeah.
even him and John together, you know, doing that. I don't think I've seen that footage where he's about to pull his pants down and George goes, "Cut."
yeah, that's some of that's
That's always
hysterical.
fun. Yeah, listen, as I said at the top, when you see the Beatles themselves, it's amazing. It's fun. It's just so refreshing. I love their humor, and especially at that point where they're so naive about everything, and they're just letting it all hang out, because not almost literally, but letting him all hang out because they were just going with it because they weren't fazed by any of it.
And
And
it's
it
so
was
hard
great.
because as hard, anybody that is a hardcore collector, yeah, of course you need to see this
Right.
because there's Beatles footage you've never seen. I
I
think the
think they
problem
said
is-
17 minutes of Maysles. I couldn't
Right.
find 17.
And I think the problem is, you know, we end up sort of, I think the thing that we bitch about most in situations like this is what would be considered to be lost opportunities.
Yes.
I think that's kind
Yeah.
of our, you know,
Right.
if we as critics or as pundits or whatever the hell we are, or you know,
Observers.
what's our, as observers, like what's our deal? Our deal is kind of like, yeah, we sort of don't like seeing missed opportunities, and sometimes that's what I think when you look at it. If you combine all of our combined gripes, that seems to be what it is really.
Yeah. You
Right?
know what
About
also?
missed opportunity.
I don't think they also need it as much as it's very heartwarming. They didn't need Paul saying, "What would you say to John and George if they were here today? I love you." What does that matter about the 64? It doesn't mean a damn thing. Like it's so out of context in this. It's very heartwarming because they probably needed some more Paul footage because he didn't really say much in the whole thing. You know, you
I
know
thought
what else also? It's really weird. I just thought of this. Paul shows you the big mural of all the fans, and he goes, "There they are," which is very cool for this. It was good. And he points out the monkey, you know, and they don't, and then about 30 minutes later, in a crowd scene, you see a monkey that looked like the one that they were, but like they didn't equate it together. That crowd scene should have been right after Paul says
That photo.
monkey. Yeah, but like all of a sudden you see a monkey and you're like, he just talked about that about 15 minutes ago.
Right.
Well, you know, it also got me. Remember that famous photo where there was Ringo took of the 5 people in the car,
Yep.
and then they a couple of years ago when he put out his book,
They
they found the
recreated it.
people on the Today Show and they recreated it. Well, there's a scene where that picture is in the background, except they're not talking to anyone in that car,
Right.
which would have been a nice little touch, and also to show that, hey, look what Ringo did too, because he was taking a lot of pictures too.
That, you're right.
You know, that just, and that picture's become a famous picture, even
Yep.
though the Beatles aren't in it, but we know Ringo took it, you know, so
But
it would have
that's
been nice
important.
for Ringo to talk about that picture because he has. And
Yep.
and my other qualm, I want to get back to the talking head people because
Yeah.
there's a couple others we missed.
Go ahead.
Danny Bennett,
Yeah.
who's Tony Bennett's son, was his manager.
Which they never tell you either.
Right. They
Nope.
they say
Danny Bennett.
Right.
Okay. Member of whatever the band was that he was in. He was in a Long Island band too.
Trade Winds, was it?
Was he
I
in the
don't know.
Trade Winds? Was he in the
I
Rich?
don't know.
Whatever. But I'm just saying, you know, they don't ever say
Yeah.
who he is.
Go ahead.
But you know what I liked? He had all his stuff wrapped. You know, he's a hardcore fan. I never
He is
realized that.
hardcore, yeah.
And he went. And there's a great scene where he's talked about they showed his ticket. This was a nice scene from Shea Stadium, and they were knocking down Shea in 2008. He went probably because he knew who to call, and got the actual seat number from Shea. So
That
he
was cool.
has that too. It was a great little scene of a fan
Yes.
who kept everything. He kept everything's wrapped up.
He had
But
the
he was
dress, and he's
smart.
the guy.
Yeah.
But here's my question though.
Go ahead.
And again, I too thought that was a great scene. Is it about the Beatles in 1964?
Yes.
Not the
Yes.
Shea Stadium thing, but everything else. Yeah.
Yes.
All right, because
They showed memorabilia from 64.
okay,
Right.
Wingding sneakers.
okay.
The
But
dress.
the Shea thing is not.
No,
right.
but
But you know, it shows how hardcore he is. That he
Right.
got the
Yes.
actual seat.
It's
right,
a great
He
thing.
became-
he became such hardcore because of 64.
Okay.
Right.
So
I'll
let
give you-
that go.
Yeah, I'll give you
The
that.
one I want to talk about, Rob, is Little Richard.
Oh God.
There's no reason for him to be in there.
Not
You talk
at
about
all.
him and Pat Boone. You never
Not-
ever they never equated that to the Beatles at all. Never.
No.
And I
The
was
only
like,
thing-
why is he in there?
Yeah, but you know what they could have done? They could have played the version of Little Richard doing Lol Tong Sally, and then or Tutti Frutti, and then they play the Pat Boone version, but then play the Beatles to show how much they respected his music and were trying to copy it, not like
Yes.
Pat Boone.
They
That
didn't even
would've
have
been
to show
different.
Pat
Yes.
Boone. They didn't even need to show Pat Boone.
No, but I see Rob's point though, Mitch, because the idea being that these were white artists who were bastardizing the black music.
Right.
Yeah.
You've got Pat Boone and his ilk pretty much destroying that music.
Yep.
And here are a bunch of white kids from Great Britain, no less, which, you know, at the time we thought was, you know, oh, they're even more, you know, staid, and, you know, and here are the Beatles coming out and giving black music its due. So I thought that was,
yeah.
you know, but Rob, you're right. That would have been cool. Just again, bang, bang, bang.
Yep. And my other person who I thought was great, and I wish there was a little more, Ronnie Spector.
Yeah.
Ronnie had she actually has a story involving the 4 Beatles, taking him up to Harlem. They show the barbecue place. They have a picture of that, and how, up in Harlem, no one knew who they were or cared really. And I thought it was a great little sidebar to what they were trying to tell with this movie, but it was a good sidebar. And, sometimes a sidebar works and it's necessary. Other times you get Little Richard and on the Rick D show,
Yeah, that was, listen, Ronnie was good because there's pictures of them in the hotel, or
right.
at least those were allegedly in the hotel, and the Beatles themselves in the dock. Although later, even though it wasn't edited well, later you hear the Beatles saying, "Yeah, we had the Ronettes, we hung out with the Ronettes," and but that should have been earlier too. So the editing again, as much as I loved Ronnie and she was good in it, but again, they didn't edit it well to get a better narrative right after she talked. They could have, had the Beatles saying we were, or had her later, depending on what, how the timing was. I don't remember.
Well,
But
there was also the thing where she says, "Well, Murray was trying to get in with the Beatles. He was asking me
Right.
to help him." So
and
maybe
right after
the
that, should have
Ronettes
been
were,
George's thing.
maybe that's how he got himself in. But he was recording. He was on the phone doing
Yeah.
remotes, so it was more than that.
Yeah, but he was doing remotes from their hotel. He wasn't doing after he got in. He wasn't doing
Right.
remotes like, before they got here overseas, like Brian Matthew was doing.
Yeah.
So that was kind of weird. The other thing, the funny clip, which I've never seen, is that White Christmas clip. That was funny.
That was
Yeah.
And George is singing, yeah, it is White Christmas and stuff. And
Well-
then they actually have one of the reporters asking Ringo about that clip later. So that was kind of cool.
I
Again,
feel like we're running almost as long as the actual documentary now.
no, it's
we've
what it
given
is.
away every
We're
scene.
close. We're
Well,
close.
everybody, listen, anybody who's seen this show has seen it. So we're just telling why we didn't like a lot of the stuff. There's a lot to love. The music, although not a lot of it was in this thing, I still think there should have been more. Whatever we did see was great. I'd still love a really great copy of Washington, even though the 2009 iTunes was very, very good.
But they didn't have the Giles Martin remix.
I agree.
Right.
And it
And
did
the
go through the
footage, the
mouth.
the Maysles footage, the restored footage, was beautiful. It really
Oh my
was.
God.
So
The-
there's
the
never,
stuff on the
listen,
train. The
you
stuff
know,
on the train is
we're
fantastic.
killing them. We're killing this thing, but anything with the Beatles, and they're in the news. So anything with the Beatles, although I got to tell you, and I told Tony, for Get Back and even Let It Be, I saw commercials on regular TV, especially Get Back, because it was a
Yeah.
huge thing. There was no, I think they knew sort of what they had here or didn't have here, because there was no commercials for this on regular TV.
I got to
No
tell you,
real emphasis.
I've seen a whole bunch of Disney Plus commercials for like, be sure to grab Disney Plus for the holidays, and they're showing quote big holiday titles.
This is not on it.
This ain't on it.
Exactly.
But it could be that, some people have said, well, is Disney Plus the official home of the Beatles now? Are they going to, and everyone blames Disney they think that they put it all together. They didn't. But
Right.
they do have, they've had, Get Back and Let It Be, and they'll probably the anthology probably down the road.
And just also, they did release, just so wrapping up, they did release a companion download or digital only soundtrack to this.
Spotify,
On Spotify. Although there's a reason why, but I'm not going to get into it. But they put the songs from the 2009 remasters and the UK version, so it wasn't even the US versions to tie in. But that's a different story for another day. But
they also don't include any live stuff.
Yeah.
They include Yesterday from Smokey Robinson and the Miracles.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, again, that's as unfocused as this documentary was. But anyway, does anybody have any last minute stuff to add?
I do.
We knew
a
you
couple
would.
of things.
That's why I said it.
Two more talking heads, not belonging in this, but I understand maybe why.
Oh.
Marshall McLuhan. No one even knows who he is, except as a joke in the Woody Allen movie.
Yep.
Annie Hall. And nothing against Betty Friedan, but do we need to say that the Beatles weren't macho and they were more soft and they were like more, come on, guys or gals.
I didn't mind that, Rob. I think
I didn't either. Yeah, I
what
thought
she was
Really?
trying
Okay.
to say is that they weren't pandering to the girls or guys or anything. They were just being themselves, and they weren't like being the macho, like typical macho rock stars. So I didn't mind that. It was okay.
But they didn't have macho rock stars in 1963 or 64, you know?
Well,
They
we
were-
didn't find that out because they didn't tell us about Frank
That's true.
Avalon and
The Beatles were, you know, taking care of a lot of business back then.
Nice.
You know, that allowed Mick and the boys to come over too, you know?
Right.
yeah, well,
Right.
And my other thing is the end. Well, first of all, if you notice in the credits, who co-owns the Beatles songs now, the songwriting? Did you notice that? MPL Communications. It says Sony Music, and then it says MPL Communications for all the Beatle songs that were used in that for the
I didn't notice
documentary.
that.
Yeah. And then the last interview, that's, you know, they go from Roll Over Beethoven into an interview.
Right.
I wanted to know where that's from because it was done before the Beatles arrived in America. And I found out that it was done for Armed Forces Radio. And it was done on January 24th, 1964. So,
Wow.
and I don't have the guy's name in front of me. Oh, it's over here. No, that's not it. Well, I don't know where it is, but it's an edited down version. But I thought it was a pretty good interview. And also, Nancy Chevelle goes as Nancy McCartney in this as a thank you.
I didn't notice that either. But you know what I did notice?
What's that?
That they gave a freaking Strawberry Fields credit for that stupid little thing John does on the mouth keyboard. Come on. He wasn't doing Strawberry Fields, guys.
No,
that's a stretch.
Wow.
But
Yeah,
they actually give a credit for Strawberry Fields Forever because he did that. He was
Yeah,
doing scales. He wasn't doing Strawberry Fields.
Wow.
right. You're right. I don't get that either. By the way, the guy's name was Harold Kelly, and the show is Weekend World Armed Forces Radio. Thanks to the Beatles Interviews.com site, I did a search and I was able to find it. It's really cut down. And at the end, he says, "Back to you, Paul," or "Back to you, something." And that's not on the interview. So, you know, I don't know where they got that part.
I did enjoy Sid Bernstein, by the way. That story when he said,
Yes.
"Don't ever come back," and then when Mick and the boy, "Don't ever come back."
That was fun.
That was very good. But they don't ever say. They say promoter, but they don't say he brought them, you know, to do stuff.
I was going to teach you to say
He brought him to Carnegie Hall, and that was the other thing. Because the Maysles brothers didn't have certain footage, it was sort of ignored.
I know.
You
They
know,
talked about it a little bit, but
Do they mention the charity benefit? Not at all.
the Paramount one.
that was
September.
later on in August.
That was
right,
September
right, right,
20th.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
September 20th.
Or
That was the
September,
last
you're
day
right.
of the 64 tour.
right. And
So, anyway,
one more thing. We're
last one, Rob. Make it a good one. Don't swing and miss like this duck.
By the way,
sorry.
for some reason, I don't know why it said "Love Me Do" credited to the Beatles and the Johnny Man Singers. Was there a version of "Love Me Do" by the
No.
Johnny Man Singers in there?
Not that I heard.
I didn't hear it either, but that was on the
Might have been
credits.
playing in the background somewhere.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
And you know, Joe Queenan talking about his father being an alcoholic. I mean,
I don't
Yeah, I
need
know.
to hear that he got beat, but he could easily forget a beating, but not seeing the Beatles. To me, that was kind of weird. I understood it, but I don't need to see that. That was kind of a little too personal for my taste. But anyway,
and
On that note-
one more thing, I just want to go
Uh-oh.
back to what I said in the beginning. I have friends who've texted me or called me because I'm the Beatle guy, and they're not Beatle guys or Beatle girls, but they liked it, and sometimes, you know, we get a little, like, it's like the third
We
time I was
nitpick.
going to go see Ringo, I didn't go, and then years later I was talking to this girl who hadn't seen Ringo and finally saw him, and you know, how many times have we seen Ringo? I've seen him like 10 times now, and she was so happy and so thrilled to see Ringo live, even though, you know, we've seen him and we know what he's going to say
of
and play.
course.
And sometimes, you know, we should remember that that, you know, sometimes it's not made for us.
So
The
all you
technology-
newbies out there, go out, grab your copy of First U.S. Visit.
Yeah.
Enjoy that thoroughly. And then wait and see if anybody gets around to editing a 17-minute version of this with just the Beatles footage and maybe some of the fans for like,
17 minutes.
Anyway, no, but I mean, seriously, this would have been a great half-hour TV show.
It would have,
Um,
yes. So
Well, you can't do half hours in the Beatles. And one more thing in the trailer, Ringo says that he's in New York, and it ends. But then if it actually continues, he says, "Oh, we're in D.C." Oh, okay. But they, so I was
again that even if you're not a Beatle fan, if you're a casual fan, that doesn't make sense because it's so disjointed. Because they showed Washington first, then they showed that an hour later, and again, fell with the editing, as Tony said at the beginning. So that is our opinion of Beatles 64. I think you can tell we didn't exactly love it, but if you
I give it a 10. Sorry.
No, if you stop. If you have to go see a really good Maysles Brothers film, go see First U.S.
Visit.
Been out since I think 2013 or so. Yeah. Anyway, for Fab Four Free for All, I have been your moderator, Mitch Axelrod, and joining me as they always do, and I'm very glad they do, are my friends Rob Leonard.
Thank you, everyone.
And Tony Chiguardo.
Thanks, folks.
And we will see you next time. Hey, everybody. Here's your chance to win a Target exclusive Meet the Beatles on blue vinyl. You can only get this at Target stores in the States and in a couple of other stores overseas like HMV and another store in Germany, but we are going to give you the one from Target. All you have to do is go back and listen to the show and tell us two talking heads, the names of two talking heads that were in Beatles 64. That's all you have to do. And then what you do is you send an email to fab4freeforall@aol.com. That's fab, the number 4, free, the number 4, all @aol.com, and put in the subject line Beatles 64, and then put your two answers in the body of the email with your name, address, and phone number so we can contact you. There'll be one winner, and the deadline for entries is the end of day, December 31st, and we will pick the winner on the new year on January 1st, 2025. Again, fab4freeforall@aol.com, and your name and all your details. If you don't give us your details, you'll be excluded. We will not use your information for anything other than this contest. Good luck.
Fab 4 Free For All was edited and produced by Tony Chiguardo at Word of Mouth Studios in Westbury, New York.
The opening and closing theme is My Dolly by the band The Badge, featuring longtime listener Jeff Slate, available on its debut album Digital Retro and recent Best Of compilation, as well as from the Fab 4 Free For All website.
Thanks for listening to Fab 4 Free For All.